One of the most powerful things when you are value pricing is price psychology. It's been around for a few years now. It's a body of knowledge that's been growing over the last few decades, and some of the evidence is incredible. Some of the things that we can do, the way that we position our pricing, can completely change the perception of price and people seeing it as smaller than it really is. Now, the single most powerful principle in psychology is called anchoring. And a lot of the price psychological techniques work because of anchoring. It's the single most powerful thing. So let me just explain a little bit this weird world of anchoring and why it kind of works. There was a great study done way back in 1974 by two economists, Nobel Prize-winning economists called Tversky and Kahneman. And they carried out an experiment which is now widely referred to as the United Nations experiment. And it worked like this. They got a whole bunch of subjects and people, put them into two categories, and each one in turn they would ask two questions. But before they asked the questions, the two questions, they had a carnival-style wheel of fortune that they would spin. And this had the numbers 1 through to 100 marked on it. So they'd spin the wheel, and a number would come up, and then they'd ask a question of the subject. They would say, so tell me, is the percentage of African nations in the United Nations higher or lower than, and then whatever number spans. So if it was 65, it would be higher or lower than 65. And they would say higher or lower. Now, that wasn't the real question. The real question was the follow-up question, because they then said, so what is the percentage of African nations in the UN? And the interesting thing, and they would give a percentage, the recipient, the subject would guess whatever they thought the number was. The interesting thing was the carnival-style wheel of fortune was rigged. It would only ever come up with one of two numbers. It was either 65 or 10. So for half of the audience, the subjects, they got asked the questions where it was, is it higher or lower than 65? And half got, is it higher than lower or 10? And here's the fascinating thing. When they then did the experiment, they then analysed the results. And what they found was that when they looked at the people who had the 65, and they looked at question B, the second question, they found that on average, those people estimated the proportion of African nations in the UN to be 45%. In contrast, the other half of people, when they got the 10 came up, their estimate was wildly different. It was 25%. Now, how can that work? We're rational people, and we know that if you spin a wheel and come up with a random number should not influence the way that we ask a simple question like what proportion of African nations are in the UN, or what proportion of the UN is made up of African nations. A random number should not influence that, but it does significantly. If you're interested, the real answer was 28%, so half of them got it close-ish when it span a 10. So a huge difference. And what has been demonstrated in 1974 by Kahneman and Tversky, and in many, many, many experiments ever since, because this fascinates behavioural economists and psychologists. You see, what happens, what we found is that we are influenced by seemingly irrelevant, random other numbers. Other numbers can create an anchor. So this is why, when if you've heard me teach you the concept of optimal pricing, how you get the highest possible price, you want to change your mindset. When you go in with your first price, you do not want the client to say yes, because that means you've gone in too low. You want the client to say, that's more than I was expecting, that's a bit expensive. Because when you go in high, you create an anchor, or sometimes it's called a reference price. And when you create an anchor in their mind, when you then have a system to change the price and change the package, every other price after that is more readily acceptable because they've had an anchor. You want to price high. So what I'm going to do is just share with you very quickly 3 or 4 a quick idea to think about when it comes to price psychology, and then I'll show you practically how you apply it. So one of the things to think about is the importance of price endings. The way that a price ends, the final number, is critically important. There are many studies that have been carried out over the last few decades around this. For example, you may have heard of the power of 9. This is ending prices in a 9. Very common in the retail world. Evidence, research demonstrates, shows why it works. It's powerful. That doesn't mean that you end your price in a 9, but it works in the retail world. Price endings are critically important. You must understand them and know how to express your price. Also, we learn from price psychology that the description, the words you use to describe your price, are really important, can make a big difference. There was a study done which asked the question of subjects where they got them to compare and say which was smaller, the phrase a £5 fee or a small £5 fee. It shouldn't make any difference whatsoever. It would be crazy to think it makes a difference, but it does. The research was carried out back in 2008, and it was reported in the Journal of Consumer Research. And what they found in their studies was that amongst tightwads, which they defined as people who are typically price sensitive, but there's also a result with the rest of the population, they found that with a certain type of person, it made a difference in response rate by as much as 20%, which is a huge impact just by inserting the word small. So words are really important. And if you use the cloud pricing software that I've created for you, then you can determine yourself. You can decide what wording you use. I happen to like the word "your small monthly investment is just," because the word "just" implies two things, doesn't it? Just is, it reinforces the word small. It's small, it's just, it's only. But also just, it's fair. It's a fair price. If you've ever studied NLP, you'll know that we can use all sorts of language in very creative ways to get better results. Here's another one. It's the price order effect, and this was something discovered by Suk, Lee and Lichtenstein back in 2012. And they carried out an experiment. It was in the bar industry. And what the outcome of it was, they demonstrated very clearly that the order in which you present prices is critically important. So for example, if you use cloud pricing, you may notice, and this is a common question I get, people say to me, Mark, why is it that the premium advanced gold is on the left and not over on the right? And the reason for that, as you probably know, it's because of the price order effect, which one of the reasons for it is anchoring. It comes back to anchoring. It's because in the Western world, when we read, we tend to read from left to right. And so when we read from left to right, our brain sees the leftmost price first. And that creates an anchor or reference price versus the other prices. So we always make sure the most expensive one is on the left. Okay, lots of research around that. It's very powerful. If some people say to me, so Mark, why don't Starbucks do this? Well, I think the reason for that is because it may well be this research has not been around that long, and they just may not have seen the research or tested it. But I've noticed, for example, that Intuit QuickBooks, a huge, great big software company, they've now started to switch it. It's the other way around. We're starting to see it catch on now. So now you understand why. Next idea I want to share with you is don't reveal the headline price. The headline price is the total price. So let's say that you are selling a service like a tax return service and you want to sell it at $4.95. Okay, that's an okay price. But if you were to express the price as 5 easy payments of $99, you will get a better result because people perceive 5 lots of $99 as being a lower price than $4.95. Now, I sometimes get accountants say to me, Mark, you are crazy. I see through that every single time. I know that 99 times 5 is 495. And firstly, that's because perhaps, like me, you're a bit weird because we're accountants. We work with numbers every day. We understand numbers, and perhaps we do the calculations. But the reality is, most people do not. Your clients, most do not. They will judge it based on the 99. And there's been lots of experiments around this. Back in the 1990s, John T. Gorville did a lot of experiments around this. But one I thought was particularly interesting was in 2005, Mazumdar, Raj and Sinha, in their research, what they found was that even when we know that we should multiply it up to come to a headline price, we still, in our brains at the subconscious level, we're still influenced by the 99, not the 495, which is the result of 5 times 99. We are still influenced. And that's why in the cloud pricing software, we have methodologies, structures to allow you to decide how you structure how the price is expressed. Price psychology is fascinating. There are so many techniques that we can use, techniques that can completely transform your results, get you much, much higher prices. If you want to explore this topic further, some time ago I created a video training course on this very issue. So if you want to become an expert on price psychology and how you can apply it in the accounting profession to your practice, to your prices and get better profits, then I'll put a link somewhere to this video training program so you can grab a copy. But what I want to do now is I want to just show you how you can use cloud pricing to apply a number of those techniques. So let me go and show you how you do it in practice. If you want to use price psychology, then in the template section when you're editing them, it all happens in the expressing the price tab along the top. So if you want to control the way that you describe your price, this is the words on the screen the client sees immediately before the price of each of your packages. You'll see that's called the pricing descriptor, and it's here. So by default I've got it as your small monthly investment is just, but you can change that to whatever you want. So that's the first thing that you can change, the way you describe the price. Much of the rest of it is under the pricing of the packages. So if you want to use price endings, particular endings, then you would firstly turn rounding on, and then in the box next to it you will need to put in the number that you want the prices to end as. So in this particular case, that would ensure that my middle package, the full bookkeeping, will always end with a 7. If you don't want to use that, just turn rounding back off again. We can also choose the period that the price is spread over. So we can use this whole idea of don't reveal the headline price. We can chunk it down. And so that's where we use period spread over. Now in this particular case, I've got bookkeeping open here, and bookkeeping, you would probably want to express it as a monthly price. So I would suggest that recurring services, you will probably have a 12 in all of these. You certainly wouldn't have a 1. That would be expressing the headline price or total price. So that would be a 12. But if you want to price other services, one-off services, like moving people onto a cloud accounting system, we can use this piece of psychology quite creatively. So again, rather than having a 1, we could let the client spread the payments over 2 or 3 installments, again, so we can use the power of chunking the price down. So that's how we set up the price psychology. There's one other area which I haven't mentioned in the video so far, and that's whether or not you want to show decimal places. Now, by default, the software leaves it so that it shows whole pounds or whole dollars. It doesn't have the cents or the pence. And that's because, again, based on some psychology which I didn't cover, I believe that for much of what we do in the profession, we are better showing whole prices. However, it is possible to show it to the nearest pence or cents or whatever it is that you have as your decimal points, your decimal currency. And there are situations where you might want to do that. It's advanced stuff from a price psychology point of view, and so my advice for now is just leave that option as it is, which is hiding decimal places.